why we have an obligation to prove these.
Collateralized debt obligation?
You're under no obligation to me what you do when I'm not there.
And there won't be no further obligation.
The artist's obligation is to go to Paris.
It's perfectly clear. You have a moral obligation to disclose it to the court.
For an individual.
It's our obligation to go fight for somebody else.
I felt I still feel under an obligation to you.
It's our obligation to wait for the medical exam.
There's no obligation to do anything.
You seem to think I have some kind of obligation.
Our obligations, our principles.
Long time for Newton to be proved. Which is why we have an obligation to prove these. And if we do, I believe that...
It's true. Goldman, the Lehman Brothers, Merrill, collateralized debt obligations, this internet stock bullshit. I mean, it's a fucking travesty.
Stay home.
You're under no obligation to me what you do when I'm not there. Has nothing to do with the reality that you and I share.
Circumstances, I'll just give you back Mr. Morgan's dollar deposit, and there won't be no further obligation. Ma'am, I just don't know how to put into words a sense of sorrow that I...
Go to Paris. You'll never regret it the rest of your life. Every artist's obligation is to go to Paris at least once in their life. You got to go. The street.
You don't need me to tell you. It's perfectly clear. You have a moral obligation to disclose it to the court.
It happens this information is favorable to the defendant.
Our country that's having something forced upon them, or our individual.
It's our obligation to go fight for somebody else.
If you believe in it,
family.
if you...
Forgive me for thinking that.
Only natural.
That's why I felt I still feel under an obligation to you.
Oh, not at all. Let's forget it.
No.
About the pills. Maybe the dame took an overdose.
Jimmy, it's our obligation to wait for the medical examiner. He's a learned physician employed by the city to...
Roast beef night. You'll have a good meal, you'll meet some of the brothers, and there's no obligation to do anything else.
No, I don't believe in fraternities. You seem to think I have some kind of obligation to him. Okay, nothing could be further from the truth.
It cannot be. We have our duties, our obligations, our principles. In short, Harold, I think it is time...
3 times daily?
Of course. But those are the givens in the equation, one's obligations.
How romantic.
Telling what he knew to his superiors, which he didn't say, was if he had a moral obligation to do more.
Steve Garvin's pretending he's not home.
No one from...
Come on, give me a lift. I'll buy you an ice cream. No further obligation.
Oh, boy.
Start making exceptions, I'll be stuck here another 9 years.
Fred, you're always talking about the obligation of doctors to humanity. Well, Fred, there is humanity.
We're under no contractual obligations. I know we all have different, opinions about this, but...
It's just a fairy tale for little girls. That really, it's all just urges and obligations. Wow. It's kind of harsh. You want my advice?
Looking for those who are. Now, if you have any knowledge of what he's been involved in, you do have an obligation to share that with me.
Are you charging me with anything?
No, I'm not.
Nothing any good. I've never been able to do it full time. I've always been up to my neck with other obligations.
If we're going to go back in time to that unholy coupling, then I have a medical obligation to drink.
I saw this was not a man I could have children.
In our minds with escape from history and oppression and law and irksome obligations. The absolute freedom.
My sole purpose was to try to restore in him some appreciation of his obligations as a man and as a soldier.
It must be understood, no British troops will come up the Nile. I will not assume a British obligation to police the world. If you can help the Sudan, your country will be grateful.
This is so fucking screwed up! Chris, I have a legal obligation to get to the truth. I'm telling you the truth. Or to exonerate you if you weren't in...
There's something wise about them, and I find myself drawn to them in ways much stronger than my obligations to the military.
Anyone wants a guide, I'll let you know.
I've had so many obligations lately. If it is not inconvenient, I could use a small advance.
I see. We all have an obligation to be happy.
In case any of you think I'm joking, I'm not. I assure you that once my legal obligation to look after your best interest is removed, I can be...
Sure. Look at the month line.
You can drop out at any time with no further obligation. That was my sales pitch.
Peace agreements underway establish an obligation for all parties to facilitate the location of mines or any other threat to humanitarian and...
Suck the paint off your house and give your family a permanent orange afro.
I don't care what you two do, but I'm fulfilling my obligation. I intend to go down there and seize control of that in place.
I'm a man. You have an obligation to my brother, and yet you ask me to assume it.
I thought that by coming here to you, I'd
Didn't you have an obligation to tell your employer you had this dreaded, deadly, infectious disease?
I don't really know what the word love means, except duty, obligation, sentimentality, fear.
Marriage is a different relationship, you know, to an affair. It's actually a contract between two people expressing obligation. I have obligations to you, you have...
Legacy as much as it is my own. Now I have an obligation to protect that. Lara, I know.
And her duty.
Say, how's that?
I cannot think my sister in the least should fail her obligation, if, sir, perchance, she hath restrained the...
Truman. We have car payments. What, we're just going to walk away from our financial obligations?
It would be an adventure.
I thought we...
Spot in the Texas Air National Guard, and then apparently failing to meet some of his obligations in the Guard. Did then Lieutenant Bush fulfill all his...
We were with horsemen against tanks. You have an obligation to tell me everything you know.
You don't have a stomach for everything I know.
Ah, fuck.
Grand, Tom. Spell out the holy days of obligation and start at the beginning. There's a rap on the knuckles if you don't start.
I'm also the Archbishop, and you have introduced me to deeper obligations.
We won't have anything hanging over our heads. I'll be free of all my obligations.
Are you sure, Si?
I've only stayed because of the...
Until I have saved yours, that is my vow.
Thanks, but I go to England. I relieve you of your obligation.
Only Allah can do that.
Observe other aspects of our mission. We have no other obligation.
A lot has happened.
Belay. Can we see the paperwork on those deals?
Oh, I'm under no obligation to share that information with you,
Just
whoever you
answer
might
the
be.
question, George.
You don't exist. You haven't a care in the world. No worries, no obligations, no $8,000 to get, no Potter looking for you with a sheriff.
Say something else, Natty. Very sexually compatible people enjoying each other with no obligations, no complications, no individual history, no mutual history.
I will, of course, fulfill my obligation to the Count and me to the family. I will tell them everything that he's
And work and think as individuals, but with an obligation to the society we live in. By what right do you dare say that there's a...
Technology operating in the service of an a priori belief system. How much...
We scientists have a moral obligation to the public, as well as to our own research.
If there were foods of evidence, they could shorten that time.
There is a safety issue, Al.
I understand that.
We're under no obligations in these conditions.
Mitch, what will happen?
Dunno.
You've staked me plenty of times. I don't forget my obligations.
Threatening will only make it worse, Jack.
Or deny those remarks. She had a moral obligation to the theater.
Well, it wouldn't have done any good for us all.